Hello, and welcome to Life Diaries, a space where the pages of life open up, one story at a time. These are tales written by experience, spoken from the heart. Take a moment for yourself, and let's begin. Mid-March, early evening. From the sky, covered with leaden gray clouds, snow pellets mixed with cold rain were falling. Underfoot, the semi-liquid, muddy slush squelched, on which the few passers-by constantly slipped. Eleanor Vance stepped cautiously, her eyes scanning carefully for a place to put her foot. That was all she needed, on top of all her misfortunes, to fall sprawling on the slippery mess and break something. As it was, she hardly ever left the hospital walls. What could she do? Age was taking its toll, and the diagnosis sounded discouraging. Turning around, the elderly woman saw a smiling face. Standing before her was a tall, stately young woman with a mass of red hair. Of course, Eleanor Vance recognized her at once, although perhaps she no longer bore the surname Miller. Her former student. 3 years ago, Eleanor Vance had seen this class graduate and had left the school, retiring on a well-deserved rest. They stopped and exchanged a few words. It was always heartwarming for the former teacher to hear about the successes of her charges. And Lydia, it turns out, was studying at the Faculty of Finance and Economics, and even working part-time. Clever girl, a real go-getter. They parted. Lydia hurried on about her business, and Eleanor Vance headed towards the shop. The potatoes had run out, and some fresh bread wouldn't hurt. She would get just a little of everything. How much does one person need? Before, Eleanor Vance, like all her colleagues and friends, tormented herself with diets. And now she could allow herself an extra bun, or a sweet. But the joy of eating had somehow disappeared. And in general, the very flow of life had changed. Headaches began to plague the woman almost immediately after she left work. The farewell was solemn, with the whole staff, around a table set in the school cafeteria. Words of gratitude were spoken in honor of Eleanor Vance, each colleague recalling something good. It was a little awkward, but touchingly moving. At the time of her retirement, Eleanor Vance was only 60. It was frightening to leave the familiar staff, to leave the school where she had given almost 40 years of her life teaching history. But what was she to do? The children were becoming different. It was harder and harder to find an approach to them. In short, Eleanor Vance didn't wait for them to show her the door. Realizing that things were heading that way, she wrote the resignation letter herself. For a long time, the newly minted pensioner got used to the new routine. At first, she would wake up at 7 in the morning and, out of habit, get ready for work. Only then would she remember that she didn't need to go to school anymore. She would lie down again, but sleep wouldn't return. Then Eleanor Vance would stand by the window and watch the people. Adults hurried about their business, children rushed to lessons, and she felt as if she had fallen out of this stream of life, found herself somewhere on its periphery. "Don't talk nonsense," replied her old friend Carol to her frankness. "Life only begins in retirement. Enjoy your well-deserved rest." Carol herself had retired a couple of years earlier, but she couldn't understand Eleanor Vance. Carol had a husband, adult children, and most importantly, grandchildren, 5-year-old twins Pete and Susie. The parents worked, and the grandparents actively participated in raising the little ones. So Carol had a full life. She had someone to care for. How could she understand Eleanor Vance? And with her own, things just didn't work out. No matter how much the woman was treated, no matter what doctors she consulted. Her husband Arthur, being the chief physician of the local regional hospital, had the opportunity to arrange consultations with any medical luminary. He had connections, but nothing helped. And so Eleanor Vance remained childless. Both she and her husband. How many children there were in the world, unwanted by their own parents. Over her years working at school, Eleanor Vance had seen plenty of such cases. Seemingly a prosperous family, the child dressed and shod like a doll. But you could still see those who lacked parental affection and attention. Eleanor Vance and her husband would have been happy to raise Elias, make him happy, show him the world, raise a kind, decent person. But the stork never came to them. For a long time, Eleanor Vance resigned herself to the fact that she was not destined to be a mother. She didn't give up immediately. She fought to the end, until her health began to fail. Then, at the first alarming signals, her friend Carol, she had the full set by the time she was 100, but she didn't fully appreciate her happiness, as is often the case with people for whom everything comes easily. She took the gift from heaven for granted, and even complained to Eleanor Vance periodically, now about her lazy son, now about her fashion-conscious daughter. And her friends with children. If they wanted to, they went on a trip. If they wanted to, they lay around all day watching TV after a hard work week. No lessons, no children's clinics, no endless clubs and sections. And still, Eleanor Vance suffered. She wanted to give warmth and affection to a loved one who needed her. And she feared a lonely old age, for it would come someday, and there would be no one to even give her a glass of water. And then somehow came the realization, everyone has their own path. Eleanor Vance's was like this. Not the worst, honestly. She had a loving husband, financial security, a job she adored. It was to her work that the woman gave her heart and soul. At school, there were always children who needed her help. Seeing such children, she tried to notice their problems, to support them in difficult moments. Some had no one else to rely on in this life but her. And they were so vulnerable, so defenseless. The stories of her students still surfaced in Eleanor Vance's memory in the smallest details. Here, for example, Chris Davis. Everyone had written him off. The principal himself predicted the boy would end up in prison soon. Teachers refused to teach if he was in the classroom. Chris was ostracized from all sides, and all he needed was a heart-to-heart talk with someone who would understand him, pity him. Eleanor Vance turned out to be that person. Chris had serious problems at home. His father drank, lashed out at the children, beat his wife. Eleanor Vance understood that Chris Davis would be lost in such a family. She used all her connections and arranged for the difficult but very clever boy to attend a cadet school. Boarding school, strict discipline. All of this did its job. Now Chris, who was considered a future criminal at school, holds a senior position in the police force, is married, happy, and quite prosperous. And he still doesn't forget to call his favorite teacher, visits her, and thanks her again for playing such an important role in his fate. Or Anna Thompson, a quiet, timid girl who couldn't even open her mouth at the blackboard. She got weak C's, given for her quiet, trouble-free behavior. Anna had a mild degree of cerebral palsy, so the girl stood out from her peers, walked a little awkwardly, and her legs would periodically cramp. Eleanor Vance felt sorry for Anna and began to pay attention to her. And somehow she got talking to her. It turned out that Anna was a person wise beyond her years, a little sage. Anna confided her secret to Eleanor Vance. It turned out the girl secretly wrote poetry, but didn't show it to anyone. She was shy. Eleanor Vance helped Anna believe in herself, and also introduced her to local poets. They appreciated the girl's talent from a professional point of view, took her under their wing and patronage. Now Anna is the author of several books and the head of a literary club at a local university. She found herself and no longer seems like that quiet and timid girl she used to be. Anna is a real star. There were such happy stories in Eleanor Vance's life, but she didn't always manage to help a child. Here's Katie, for example. Katie Adams, a thin, tall girl with long hair the color of ripe rye. A true beauty. Fair skin, bottomless blue eyes, regular, pleasant features. Katie. This little girl had serious problems in her family. Katie's father had either died or run away many years ago. The girl didn't even remember him. Since then, her mother had dreamed of settling her personal life. She was a young, very striking woman who changed boyfriends like gloves. And it would be fine if she just changed them. She followed them all over the country and, of course, dragged the child along with her. Katie came to Eleanor Vance's school in the 8th grade. She never stayed longer than a year and a half, all because of her mother's craving for change. Katie's mother worked as a hairdresser, a profession that allowed her to easily find a job in any city. Or she could work unofficially, freelancing at home, which the woman often did. Katie had to move to this city because of her mother's new suitor, another stepfather. He was a long-distance truck driver who had met Katie's mother by chance in a bar. Well, he took her in. Eleanor Vance noticed immediately that Katie's life wasn't easy. She had a sharp eye. She had seen such children. She felt their trouble. The teacher began to watch the girl more closely. Katie kept to herself. No one bullied or teased her, but she didn't really socialize with anyone either. She avoided talking to the girls, tried not to participate in school-wide events. The girl stayed late at school. She would sit in the library, reading something, doing her homework, clearly delaying the moment of returning home. One day, Eleanor Vance stayed late at school. A parent-teacher meeting unexpectedly ran long. When everyone had left, it was already dark. Eleanor Vance noticed a lonely, hunched figure on a park bench in the schoolyard. The sensitive woman immediately understood. This person was clearly in trouble. She approached closer, looked carefully. Katie was sitting on the bench in the school garden. Seeing Eleanor Vance, she was initially flustered, embarrassed. The teacher managed to get her to talk. She understood what the girl wanted to hear and feel. She saw that she needed the involvement and sympathy of an adult, a strong person. Katie spoke little at first. She was shy. And then somehow, little by little, she opened up, told Eleanor Vance about her life. The teacher, who had seen a lot, learned terrible things. Katie's mother, it turned out, had repeatedly blamed her daughter for her failures in her personal life because, allegedly, it was difficult to find a good man with a child. And Katie's mother's men were varied. There were indifferent ones who didn't notice the girl at all. There were also aggressive, irritable ones. The current stepfather constantly picked on Katie. Everything she did, in his opinion, was wrong. He also yelled at her mother, sometimes even hit her, especially when he had been drinking. Eleanor Vance discovered a terrible thing. Katie. She didn't want to go home. That's why she constantly stayed late in the library. And when it was warm, she would wander the streets until night, or sit somewhere until the last minute, and only then return to the apartment. There was nowhere else to go. With an aggressive man and a perpetually irritated mother, Katie felt that no one in the family needed her, that she was just in everyone's way, that everyone would be much better off without her. The girl poured out her soul to the teacher, and tears streamed down her cheeks at that moment. Eleanor Vance hugged Katie, said something soothing, and was angry. Angry at Katie's mother. This woman didn't appreciate the gift fate had given her at all. Such a wonderful girl. Beautiful, sensitive, capable. She didn't study very well, it's true, but it's not surprising. When would she have time to do homework if she tried to get home by the time everyone was already asleep so as not to bother them? What she learned from her mother was not to provoke rudeness, or even punishment. And she became even more attentive to Katie. A warm, trusting relationship developed between them. Sometimes the girl would go home with the teacher after school. It was quiet and peaceful there. She could prepare for her lessons. Katie even improved her grades. Arthur, Eleanor Vance's husband was appalled. He initiated a check by the Child Protective Services. He thought maybe this agency would at least hold the careless adults accountable, force them to start taking care of the child. But the check concluded that the family was quite prosperous. The apartment was renovated, the child had her own bed, the refrigerator was full of food. Eleanor Vance was choked by this lie, by its detachment from the very sad reality. But what could it be? Katie didn't write poetry, she couldn't sing, she didn't want to dance, handicrafts didn't appeal to her. Eleanor Vance just couldn't find what would help Katie endure. The girl needed strength to grow into a normal person, to become strong, independent. Katie transformed from an awkward girl into a pretty young woman. She still had no friends among her classmates, but she started socializing with girls and boys from the college located near the school. Eleanor Vance kept a close eye on her student. She feared that life circumstances would force her down a slippery slope. The woman talked a lot with the girl, told her about the various dangers that lie in wait for teenagers. In essence, she was doing important work for her mother. Katie. She would nod her head, promising not to do anything foolish, and each time she thanked Eleanor Vance for her concern. "You do more for me than my mother," Katie would sometimes say. "Nonsense!" Eleanor Vance objected. "Your mother feeds you, gives you drink, clothes you, and you warm my heart." Eleanor Vance saw that Katie was drawn to her, that the girl listened to her opinion. And yet she was very worried about her. What if something happened? Katie was at such a difficult and dangerous age, and her only significant adult was her history teacher. It shouldn't be like that. And then, Katie disappeared. The evening before, she had visited Eleanor Vance. The teacher was delighted, invited her to the table. The girl had dinner with Eleanor. They talked a lot that evening. They laughed. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. And only just before leaving, Katie suddenly handed Eleanor Vance a locket. Inexpensive, but pretty. Costume jewelry locket, silver-colored. "This is for you." "Thank you very much. It's a lovely thing. But isn't there a special occasion?" "Take it anyway." "Thank you, Katie." Katie left. And only then did Eleanor Vance realize that the locket opened. Inside was a photo of Katie. It was clear the picture had been taken recently. The young woman was smiling cheerfully at the camera and looked like a model. A beauty. Eleanor Vance was happy with the gift. She perceived it as a sign of attention, of care. A teacher. A sensitive girl. A grateful teenager is rare these days. And yet this gesture immediately struck Eleanor Vance as strange and even unsettling. And the next day, Katie was gone. She didn't appear at school, she wasn't at home either. Her mother, deep in the night. But this time it was clear that something out of the ordinary had happened. Katie, being a minor, was immediately searched for. It was no laughing matter. A 16-year-old teenager had disappeared. Flyers were even posted around the city. There were many versions of the girl's fate. Some even said she had become the victim of some passing criminal. But Eleanor Vance was sure. Katie had simply run away. Perhaps not even alone. The girl had known the evening before that she would leave. And that locket with the photo, it was her farewell gift. Eleanor Vance told the investigator about this detail. But he didn't take her words into account. He dismissed them. The leading theory at the time was abduction. Katie was never found. Her mother, after some time, met a new boyfriend and took off with him to unknown lands. She, like Eleanor Vance, was sure. Her daughter was alive. She had just run away somewhere because she didn't want to study, and they made her at home. She had found a boyfriend and was now enjoying life, youth, and freedom. Eleanor Vance never heard about her student again. although she tried several times to find out her fate. As a memento of the girl, she kept that very locket. It was now stored in her jewelry box. Sometimes Eleanor Vance would take it out, open it, and gaze at Katie's cheerful, beautiful face. Where was she now? This girl who was no longer a girl at all, but an adult woman. How had her fate turned out? For some reason, it seemed that running away couldn't end well. Eleanor Vance blamed herself. She blamed herself for not stopping Katie that evening, for not asking her more about her plans. After all, the unexpected gift had made the woman uneasy. But the girl? She had looked quite happy then. Yes, happy. It was strange, but heartwarming. Eleanor Vance thought that perhaps the girl's life had finally improved, for a joyful spark shone in her eyes. And yet this was how it had all turned out. "You can't save everyone," Arthur reassured his wife. He saw how she tormented herself with guilt. "I know for sure, things like this happen in the hospital. Trouble. It just happens. Even if you did everything to prevent it. There's nothing you can do about it." Eleanor Vance understood. Her husband was right. But she was still tormented by thoughts of Katie. The worst thing was the uncertainty. She so wanted to believe that things had turned out well for this girl. But that was self-deception. What good could happen to a runaway teenager, unwanted by her parents? Arthur, beloved husband, best friend, closest person. So smart and serious, so strict and responsible at work, so tender and kind with her, with Eleanor Vance. They had been together since they were 20. They met at an amusement park while they were students, and they hadn't parted since, until death separated them 7 years ago. Arthur worked in a leadership position, chief physician of the regional hospital. A stressful job, a responsible one. He was loved and respected for his professionalism. Arthur loved his work, and Eleanor Vance understood him in this. She felt the same way about her own work. And so Arthur passed away right at his workplace from a sudden heart attack. So many doctors were around, and they couldn't save him. "Trouble just happens," Arthur had once said. And so it happened. The trouble. Eleanor Vance fell into apathy. Perhaps only work pulled her out then. At school, whether you wanted to or not, you had to keep going. Students and colleagues distracted Eleanor Vance, gradually bringing her back to life. And then retirement. And Eleanor Vance felt completely alone and useless. She hadn't imagined this time like this. They would travel. They had the money for it. Eleanor Vance's husband was serious, responsible, and had opened a savings account long ago. Money was being saved there for their happy old age. But Eleanor Vance's old age turned out not to be so happy. 2 years after retirement passed in a mode of adapting to a new life. No notebooks, no school bells, no answering at the blackboard, no meetings in the principal's office, no New Year's parties, no cheerful school celebrations. Eleanor Vance thought about getting a dacha to work the land, but she realized in time that she couldn't manage a plot alone. If only Arthur were here, it would be different. Instead, the woman set up a real conservatory in the living room. Flowers were no longer just on the windowsill. They were everywhere. Eleanor Vance's personal home garden. She even had 2 birch trees in tubs. The woman enjoyed caring for the plants. After all, they too, like children, need care, attention, and love. Eleanor Vance stopped to catch her breath. Such walks were already difficult for her. The insidious disease was making itself known. And what next? The doctors had made it clear. Miracles don't happen. Eleanor Vance's condition would only worsen. How difficult it was at such a moment not to have family and loved ones nearby. Eleanor Vance's head sometimes ached before, so at first she didn't pay attention to the alarming symptoms. Her head would hurt, she'd take a pill, and everything would be fine again. Then dizziness and nausea were added, and the migraines made themselves known every day. So the elderly woman went to the hospital. She was prescribed all the necessary tests: blood tests, ultrasound, MRI. The treating doctor's verdict sounded like a bolt from the blue. The tumor was inoperable, rapidly progressing. Nothing could be done. The only thing the doctors could do was alleviate the pain. "And how much time do I have?" the woman asked, looking the doctor directly in the eyes. "Tell me honestly and frankly. I have no one. I need to somehow finish all my affairs myself, you understand? I need to know how much time I have." "Well, it's hard to say. It depends on how the disease behaves. I think at least a year. Maximum, well, in your case, no more than 2 years." A year. Only 2 summers, 2 New Years, 2 birthdays. That was in the best case. Only then did Eleanor Vance realize how much she, it turned out, loved her life. Even such a life, childless, lonely. She became scared, truly scared. At first, she even had trouble falling asleep. She kept thinking about the approaching end. And so a year passed. The last months of Eleanor Vance's time on this earth began to flow. The woman had gotten used to the thought. It no longer frightened her so much. Eleanor Vance knew. When things got really bad, she would go to a hospice, under the care of doctors. They would take care of her there. She only wished that moment would come as late as possible. Because Eleanor Vance had plants. Who would take care of them in her absence? And in general, lately the woman particularly cherished life. She admired the white clouds. She was happy with the warm sunshine. Even in these gray, leaden clouds that now covered the sky, she imagined some special beauty, restrained and cold. Eleanor Vance caught her breath and walked on. Her path led to the shop. She deliberately chose a supermarket further from home. To get there, she had to walk through the park. The weather, of course, was not conducive to walks, and it was already difficult for Eleanor Vance to move around. But without this physical activity, her body could give up sooner than was possible. Doctors recommended Eleanor Vance daily walks, so she walked. Eleanor Vance chose such a time. Rush hour. People returning from work walked past her at a brisk pace. Some still had to pop into the shop, some to the kindergarten for their child. They all seemed to live in some other dimension, hurrying, bustling. Eleanor Vance, however, could afford to walk at a leisurely pace and admire the surrounding scenery. And yet, she too had once hurried, run, rushed, just like all these young people. And suddenly, Eleanor Vance's attention was drawn by a hunched figure on a park bench. The sensitive woman immediately understood. This person was clearly in trouble. She approached closer, looked carefully. Sitting on the bench was a very young woman, dark-skinned, with black eyes. Her clothes were old and cheap. In her arms, she held a bundle. Babies like that are usually discharged from the maternity hospital. She was rocking the bundle and crying. Yes, crying. Real tears streamed down her cheeks. No one noticed these tears. People hurried past on their business. They didn't even pay attention to the girl on the bench. And even if someone had glanced at her, they wouldn't have seen the tears. The stranger with the baby in her arms was sitting half-turned, with her back to the main path of the park. Perhaps she didn't want to be seen in such a state. Eleanor Vance understood that now she definitely couldn't leave. The girl looked to be just over 20, and a baby in her arms. She couldn't just leave her in trouble. The elderly woman hesitated for a long time before speaking to the stranger. It felt awkward to bother people with questions. How would this girl perceive her attention? But Eleanor Vance saw no other way for herself. "Hello," the elderly woman said, sitting down next to the girl on the bench. "Forgive my curiosity, but what's wrong? Can I help in any way?" The girl turned her tear-streaked face to Eleanor Vance. Surprise was visible in her burning black eyes. She clearly hadn't expected anyone to show sympathy. "Thank you," the girl replied politely. "But I doubt you can help me with anything. My situation is completely hopeless." "That's not true. There's always a way out. I'm telling you this from the height of my years. There's no such thing as no way out." Her interlocutor, Eleanor Vance, smiled warmly. "There is, I would tell you, but the story is very long and not very pleasant. You're probably in a hurry?" "Well, one thing I have plenty of is free time," Eleanor Vance countered, "and I absolutely love all sorts of life stories." "And what time is it now?" The girl suddenly perked up. "Almost 6. The kindergarten is open until 7, so I still have an hour. If you have time, listen." Clara was born in a Roma camp. She and her mother were treated differently from others, dismissively. Clara was punished more severely. The girl always got more. As she got older, she understood what was going on. Her mother was an outsider here. 70 years ago, a young girl, almost still a child, had run away with her beloved to the camp. Clara's grandmother, her father's mother, adored her granddaughter no matter what. Clara was the only girl among her grandmother's son's children, long awaited. "Finally," the old woman would say, "the one to whom I can pass on my gift has been born." The grandmother never hurt Clara. They often talked for a long time, walked together through the meadows and steppes, wherever the camp was staying at the time. The grandmother showed her granddaughter medicinal plants, told her about their power, and often held the girl's hand. At this time, Clara felt some warmth passing from her grandmother to her. The Roma said that was how old Esme was passing on her gift to the girl, little by little. And they were indignant that the priceless gift was going to an outsider. Yes, Clara was called outsider in the camp. And this was despite the fact that she had lived among these people since birth. Needless to say, the girl's mother was treated much more coolly. Clara remembered her mother as a silent and indifferent to everything beautiful woman. Her father, having brought her to the camp, quickly lost interest in his beloved, and the pressure from his fellow tribesmen played a role. He had long since taken a new wife, who had given him 3 sons one after another. And Clara and her mother lived with the grandmother. Esme loved her granddaughter and spent a lot of time with her, but she kept Clara's mother more like a servant, silent. At least the old woman didn't pity her daughter-in-law. Clara always, for as long as she could remember, felt pity for her mother. Even as a small child, she understood. Something had broken this beautiful, still very young woman. Some external circumstances had turned her into such a spineless, indifferent person. Her mother, not even her own daughter, concerned her. She was always in some world of her own, like an enchanted princess. She carried out the grandmother's errands like a robot, mechanically. She spoke little, only when necessary, and never, never hugged Clara. And she so wanted to feel her mother's embrace, to see tenderness and love in her eyes, or at least interest. The grandmother didn't love her mother, but that feeling wasn't the main one. Esme gave her a roof over her head, food, clothes, and the grandmother tried to cure her mother, to bring her back to a full life. Clara saw this with her own eyes. Esme gave the young woman some kind of potions, read incomprehensible spells over her. The girl so hoped it would work, but her mother remained the same, cold, detached, indifferent. "I don't have the strength to deal with this," the grandmother would sometimes lament. Deep, deep in her soul sits sorrow, longing. No one ever loved her. That's terrible, you understand? It cripples the soul. That's why your mother couldn't bear it. But I love her, Clara exclaimed. That's what gives hope. Perhaps not all is lost yet. And also, the grandmother sees your gift. A little more, and when it completely passes to Clara, it will blossom with new strength. You will be stronger than me. The old woman smiled, smoothing her granddaughter's hair. They, all these Roma who don't accept you now, will fawn over you. They will even beg you to save them or their children from ailments. With different skills, much can be corrected with herbs and potions. Only use the gift in truly serious cases. It's not a toy. When you grow up, you'll understand. And then, one day, when Clara was only 11 years old, her mother suddenly took to her bed. She was as quiet, emotionless, and absent as ever. She lay on her bed for a week and didn't get up in the morning. She lay quiet, pale, detached, and breathing very heavily. The grandmother became worried, took out her remedies and old books, and sent Clara outside. The girl sat near the wagon, leaning her back against the wall, and prayed to all powers that the grandmother would manage to pull her mother through. But some inner feeling told her it wouldn't work. And so it turned out. Clara sat outside for about 3 hours, and then the grandmother came out to her. From her sad face, the girl understood everything at once. Her mother was no more. Clara took the loss hard. Yes, her mother had never shown any feelings towards her daughter, but still, even her presence gave Clara strength. And most importantly, hope always lived in the girl's heart. Hope that someday everything would be different. Her mother would awaken from her stupor, the spell would break, she would smile at her daughter, hug her, and a completely different life would begin. Happy, bright, warm. The grandmother supported her granddaughter as best she could and tried to understand what the child was feeling now. 2 years passed. And then one morning, Esme sat Clara down in front of her, having first warned her that they would have a serious talk. I had a dream today, the grandmother began. A difficult dream. I understood that I would soon be gone. No, grandmother, Clara exclaimed. After her mother's death, her most terrible fear was losing her grandmother, because then she would be completely alone. Her father had completely forgotten about her existence. He lived with his new family. The other Roma also didn't accept Clara. Only the grandmother. Only she in the whole world truly loved Clara. Let the grandmother stop saying such terrible words. Clara, you must understand. It must be this way. That's how it happens. Give me your hand. I will pass my gift on to you completely. I don't need it anymore. Clara obediently held out her palm to the grandmother. She squeezed it with her dry, thin hand, and the girl felt the familiar warmth as if flowing from her grandmother to her. A pleasant feeling. But this time it was frightening. The grandmother was never wrong, and she was surely telling the truth now, too. How will I manage without you? I know, dear. You're scared. The grandmother stroked her granddaughter's head. She looked at her with inexpressible sadness. It was clear that the grandmother also didn't want to leave the girl without her support. Without her, Clara was very weak and vulnerable. They never accepted you here. Listen carefully. When I am gone, leave the camp. Otherwise, they will make you a servant, wear you out with physical labor. Your gift must serve good people. It was given to you for that purpose, to save people. So as soon as I am gone, go. At night. It's warm, good. You'll easily reach the city. Any city that happens to be nearby at that moment. Ask people where the shelter, the orphanage is, and go there yourself. Ask to be taken in as a child. They won't refuse. You'll be among strangers, but at least you'll be warm and fed. You'll grow up, get stronger, Clara watched her grandmother, looking for signs of illness. But she looked as usual, cheerful, lively, quick. The girl began to think that the grandmother was mistaken, or that the terrible thing that was supposed to happen would not happen soon. But one morning, the grandmother didn't get up from her bed as usual. Clara, already knowing what was wrong, slowly approached her loved one and made sure that the grandmother was no longer here, but somewhere very, very far away. Only her body remained here. The girl cried loudly. She cried for a long time, shuddering convulsively and twitching her shoulders. But after that, she felt a little better. Then Clara sat down right on the floor near her grandmother's bed and thought deeply. The grandmother was gone. She had to leave. And it was best to do it right now, before any of the adults found out and stopped her. Clara understood. They didn't love her here because she was an outsider. Some were even hostile towards her. Only the grandmother, who had great authority in the camp, held people back. She helped the Roma get rid of toothaches, soothed migraines. Because of this, they tolerated her granddaughter. And now Clara had no protector. So it was time to follow the grandmother's advice, to run away from the camp wherever her eyes led her. Clara knew the city wasn't far. They had driven past such a nice, cozy town the evening before. Clara admired its lights, the distant towers and tall buildings. Not a metropolis, but not a tiny town either. There was definitely a children's shelter there, and not just one. So, that's where Clara needed to go. The girl quickly threw her few belongings into a backpack and, unnoticed by anyone, left the camp. She walked for a long time along a country road among wide fields, making her way towards the city. The unknown both frightened and captivated her. Tears streamed down the girl's cheeks from the abundance of emotions. She didn't even wipe them away. No one could see anyway. To herself, Clara seemed tiny, insignificant, weak. But the girl knew. Somewhere inside her sat a powerful gift. It wouldn't let her be lost. It would help her in a difficult situation. Finally, the girl reached the city, asked people for directions to the orphanage, found the institution, opened the door, and asked to be taken to the director. A strict lady in glasses listened carefully to the girl's story. It was a pre-prepared story, which, however, contained a grain of truth. Clara said that she was born and raised in a camp. She didn't specify that she was only half Roma. And then her parents died. The Roma turned the girl into a servant. Another adult widower threatened to take her as his wife. In short, Clara had escaped from such a difficult life. She chose her own path, a different one. She no longer wanted to live in the camp, but dreamed of studying, getting a profession. It was difficult, but somehow Clara was registered. They made her the necessary documents. The girl took a long time to get used to the new life. Everything was different here. It was confusing. High beds instead of mattress pallets, clean, ironed bedding, different clothes, different food, a strict daily routine, studying. Clara liked to study. She had a lot to catch up on, so the girl devoted. At first, even here, Clara was treated as an outsider. Of course, exotic appearance, unusual story. But it wasn't contempt and alienation, like in the camp. Clara aroused interest. In the first few months of her stay at the orphanage, she had to tell her story several dozen times. She even became a local celebrity. Then life settled into a routine. Clara finished 9 grades, studied to be a merchandiser, came of age, and graduated from the orphanage. She received a small apartment from the state as an orphan and got a job. Not in her profession, though. That required experience, and where was a recent college graduate supposed to get that? She worked as a cashier in a supermarket. The pay was decent at least. In short, Clara felt quite happy, And most importantly, normal. Not a second-class person like in the camp. A full-fledged person. She now perceived that past life of hers as some kind of fairy tale. Much of what had happened to her then seemed like fiction, fantasy. For example, that very grandmother's gift that she had allegedly passed on to her granddaughter. Time passed, and this superpower didn't manifest itself in any way. So Clara decided that it had all been her imagination. It hadn't happened. End of story. One day in the supermarket where Clara worked, renovations began, and the employees, who were temporarily unable to serve customers, had to take turns watching the workers. During one of her shifts, Clara met a nice young man. Tall, lean, athletic. Blonde hair, light blue eyes, a handsome gaze, an open smile. This young man immediately showed interest in the young cashier, giving her a cheerful wink. The girl smiled back, showing that she was not at all against getting acquainted. Young men had approached her before to get acquainted. Clara had an interesting and striking appearance, and she knew it well. But things never went beyond a couple of dates. These suitors disappointed the girl. But with Daniel, things turned out differently. Somehow, from the first glance, a strong and very warm feeling began to develop between them. Clara understood this right away. They didn't date for long. After a few dates, they decided to live together in Clara's apartment. Daniel wasn't from the area. He was born in a village in a large family. Well, and now he worked on a construction site, toiling hard. He dreamed of a house, not an apartment. And for now, he was living in rented accommodation. Daniel immediately took on all the handyman work around the house. He re-glued the wallpaper, fixed the curtain rod that had been crooked for a long time, repaired the wardrobe. And it also turned out that he cooked wonderfully. In fact, it seemed there was nothing Daniel couldn't do. That was his life. He had to learn everything. Together they were happy, warm, and cozy. The young people understood each other with half a word, and sometimes words weren't even needed. At last, Clara felt happy and loved. She hadn't even dreamed of such a relationship. Daniel and Clara got married, and soon after, the young wife realized she was pregnant. The joy of the future parents knew no bounds. They weren't afraid that their responsibilities would soon increase. Everything was great for them. They had a roof over their heads. They didn't complain about their finances, as Daniel earned a good living at his construction job. Their son Theo was born, their firstborn. Daniel chose his name. That was the name of his grandfather, a kind and hard-working man. A year and a half later, a daughter, Catherine, appeared in the family. Clara named her after her own mother. Caring for the little ones, household chores, all of this delighted and truly absorbed Clara. She enjoyed the role of wife and mother. Yes, sometimes it was difficult, but all of this was for her loved ones, for her husband, the reliable, caring Daniel, for Theo and Catherine, such sweet and funny little ones. The little ones started kindergarten, and things became a little easier. Clara began preparing to go back to work, deciding to leave her second maternity leave a little earlier. The couple had ambitious plans. Both dreamed of expanding, turning their one-room apartment into a two-room or even a three-room one. And only then could they think about a house. More space, and besides, it was already cramped for such a large family in one room. And then Clara realized she was expecting another child. This time she was scared. They hadn't planned on becoming a large family so soon, and besides, it wasn't the right time. Daniel supported and reassured her, assuring her that everything would be fine. "I'll work more, that's all. There are plenty of opportunities for extra work at the construction site." Tragedy struck when Clara was in her final month of pregnancy. There was only a little time left. That morning she didn't want to let her husband go to work. An unclear premonition of trouble squeezed her chest. Clara chased away the bad thoughts, explaining everything by her condition. After all, she was due soon. And just 2 hours later, Clara received a call to inform her of the terrible news. Daniel was crushed by a concrete block at the construction site. Of course, they couldn't save him. Clara wept, howled like a wounded animal. Fortunately, the children were at kindergarten. She could give vent to her feelings. The woman cursed fate, which had once again treated her so cruelly, calling Daniel back. And then somehow she suddenly felt his presence. It was inexplicable. She simply understood that Daniel was here. He saw her, wanted to comfort her, but couldn't, and it pained him. Clara pulled herself together, said aloud that she loved Daniel very much, realizing that she would no longer have the opportunity to be heard by him. And also that she perfectly understood. She now had to be strong and brave for their children. "You can be at peace about us. I'll manage." And Clara tried. She tried very hard to be strong, although sometimes it was simply unbearable. Because of stress, labor began early. She had to leave the children with neighbors. Where else could she put them? Initially, it was planned that Daniel would take time off while Clara was in the maternity hospital. But fate had twisted everything like this. The girl was born small, but strong and viable. Clara named her Annie. Daniel had wanted that. And the young woman was left with 3 small children on her hands, without any support. Clara applied for all possible benefits, but there still wasn't enough money. The children grew quickly. They constantly needed new clothes and shoes. And also, they were often sick. She had to spend astronomical sums at pharmacies. But what could she do? Health came first. That's where Clara's gift would have come in handy. If only she could rid her little ones of these endless colds and sore throats. But the gift lay dormant. Perhaps there was no gift at all. There was a severe lack of money, and Clara took a step that later seemed a fatal mistake. She took out a loan. The money, so necessary for the family, was in her hands instantly. Clara bought groceries, medicine, updated the children's wardrobe, but she had to repay the amount with high interest. At first, Clara paid the debt regularly, and then the children fell ill again. She had to pay a fortune for treatment, and Clara missed a payment. As a result, she was put on the meter. The debt began to grow wildly. It was a common scheme. Clara wasn't the only one who fell for this hook. In short, debt collectors started harassing the young woman. Clara couldn't go back to work. Annie was still too young. She couldn't even leave her for a couple of hours, to clean the stairwell, for example. In short, Clara lost her apartment. It was taken for debts, as the woman had taken the loan against the property. Clara clutched her head. Where could she go with 3 little ones? What had she done? Neighbors advised her to register at a special shelter. She could live there for about 3 months. People were given time to find a job, to settle their lives somehow. But what was Clara to do? Who would hire a woman with 3 children on her hands, one of whom was an infant? And how could she work if Annie couldn't be left with anyone, and the older ones were constantly sick and couldn't attend kindergarten? Well, that's my whole story. A week later, of course, I couldn't find a job or an apartment. How could I? I have Annie. Where would I put her? And what now? The former teacher gasped. Clara's story was simply incredible, sometimes even resembling a fairy tale. But this wasn't a movie. It was real life. And the young woman with 3 little ones truly had nowhere to go. How terrible. They'll be taken to a shelter. They'll grow up in institutional walls like I did. Only with a living mother who is so worthless she can't provide them with normal living conditions. Having said that, Clara cried again. Quietly, imperceptibly. But Eleanor Vance, of course, saw everything and perfectly understood the desperate situation the young woman was in. "Here's what," the old woman said decisively. "Move in with me. It was a strange, risky offer to invite an unknown family into her home. Eleanor Vance knew her neighbors and acquaintances would condemn her, but she didn't care. Clara and her children needed help. If she didn't reach out now, the little ones would go to a shelter, and their mother straight onto the street. 4 broken lives. Eleanor Vance had nothing. She had lived her life. And Eleanor Vance would do it, even at risk to herself. What was there to lose? Clara didn't believe her ears at first. What about your relatives? They'll be against it, won't they? No, I don't have anyone. Eleanor Vance placed her hand on Clara's shoulder. Let's go to the kindergarten for your little ones. Then we'll stop by the shop. We need to buy something for dinner. I have guests now. Eleanor Vance rejoiced more and more each day at that chance meeting with the young woman in the park. Clara turned out to be a very pleasant and kind person, hardworking, grateful, sensitive. And her children. Eleanor Vance's heart melted with tenderness when she watched them. Serious, thoughtful Theo, chatterbox Catherine, plump, bright Annie. Eleanor Vance baked them pancakes and pies, feeling like a grandmother. This feeling was so pleasant it was beyond words. Eleanor Vance and Clara often had heartfelt conversations. They both needed this warmth, care, attention, the absence of the feeling of total loneliness and uselessness. Complete strangers in just a few weeks. So she had to tell Clara about her diagnosis. If only I had that gift, she shook her head bitterly. Time passed. Eleanor Vance's condition worsened. It was inevitable. And the doctors had warned her right away. That's how it happens. It was time to move to the hospice, under the care of doctors. Clara saw Eleanor Vance off with tears in her eyes. All in the ambulance. Although the elderly woman had tried to dissuade her from this troublesome step, she would still have to go home afterwards with tiny Annie in her arms. Eleanor Vance had taken care of Clara in advance. She had willed her the apartment. The neighbors, of course, gossiped. She'll kill you, instead of just grabbing the apartment as quickly as possible. She'll poison you or come up with something else. But Eleanor Vance was sure of Clara. You couldn't fake that. The elderly woman was good at reading people. Clara was truly attached to her and was very afraid of losing her. Clara herself had said this many times and even cried. What is it? Why do all my loved ones leave? Why am I always left alone in the end? Clara, upon learning of Eleanor Vance's terrible diagnosis, broke down and wept, quite sincerely. Eleanor Vance comforted her, promising that everything would be fine. Clara later apologized to her for her weakness. The hospice was quiet, peaceful, and cozy. Kind doctors, high doses of medication to relieve pain and attacks. Eleanor Vance spent her time half asleep. Her head was clear. Her soul was calm. Clara often visited her, placed her palm on her forehead, looked attentively, directly into her eyes. After she left, Eleanor Vance felt better, more cheerful. She somehow felt stronger. Perhaps from the feeling that someone needed her, that someone was worried about her, cared for her. Several weeks passed. To her surprise, Eleanor Vance felt better. She even had the strength for walks in the hospital garden. Again, she admired the flowers, the bright blue sky, enjoying this farewell gift from fate to the fullest. She might not have another such improvement in her condition. Her tests, strangely enough, also improved. The doctors were surprised, but said that this sometimes happened. A lull before the decisive blow. Eleanor Vance suddenly had a strong desire to be home one more time. To see Clara and her little ones, to breathe in the familiar scent of her apartment, to take something from there as a memento. The locket, the one Katie had given her many years ago. A memorable item with a story. It would be good to have it with her here, in the hospice, as a reminder of home, of her past life. Eleanor Vance asked the doctor for permission. He gave his consent for the trip home. Eleanor Vance called a taxi and went. It was so amazing. She had never thought she would leave the hospice walls alive again. This wasn't a recovery, of course, not a deliverance from the illness. But not to feel pain, to be able to go wherever her soul desired. She felt strength in her legs and arms, and a pleasant lightness throughout her body. Eleanor Vance opened the door with her key. The apartment was quiet and empty. It was clear Clara was out with Annie. The little ones were at kindergarten. Eleanor Vance walked through the familiar rooms, touched her favorite things: the rocking chair, the teddy bear that Arthur had once won for her at the shooting range, the soft blanket. Here was the bedside table with the drawer where her jewelry lay. Eleanor Vance wasn't interested in the expensive chains and rings. She had come for that very locket. The elderly woman found the desired item, opened the locket, and admired Katie's cheerful face. Where is she now? Then a sound was heard. Eleanor Vance hurried towards the door. "You're home!" Clara gasped. She sat Annie down and went over to Eleanor Vance. Joy and surprise were visible in Clara's eyes. "Yes, I felt better. They let me come home for a while." "Felt better?" Clara smiled. "Really? Did it actually work?" "What worked?" Eleanor Vance didn't understand. "It's all my gift, you see. I was worried about you. I didn't want to lose another close person. I've had a lot of losses in my life as it is. While the children weren't looking, I even cried. And one day I had a dream. My grandmother, Esme the Roma woman. She strictly told me off, saying I must stop crying, that now was the time to manifest my gift. Yes, grandmother said it would be difficult, and it cost her a lot of effort. And it would all be in vain if I didn't pull you through. And I did it. I awakened the power within me. I think grandmother helped too." Eleanor Vance blinked her eyes in confusion. "Well, I'll be. Is it really true?" And then she remembered how much better she felt every time after Clara's visits, how warm her hands were. Not just warm. Eleanor Vance had thought then that she was just imagining it because of her illness. What did the doctors say? Clara herself didn't seem to fully believe in this miracle yet. Well, they said the tests improved, but it might just be a lull before the storm. There won't be any storm. Clara smiled broadly, and then hugged Eleanor Vance tightly. The storm is cancelled. My gift has awakened. It awakened so I could save you, you see? Don't believe it? You'll see. Everything will be fine. Now Clara threw up her hands in an overflow of emotion. Her coal-black eyes shone with joy. Little Annie didn't understand anything, but she sensed that something good was happening. And she smiled too, just like her mother. "Oh, what's that in your hands?" Clara finally noticed the locket. "What an interesting thing. I feel it has some special energy, warm and good." It's a gift from one of my students. A former one, of course. It was a long time ago. Eleanor Vance still couldn't quite process what Clara had said. So, the imminent end is cancelled? She'll live longer? And now she wanted to live especially. And there were the little ones who loved her so much and needed her so much. She wanted to see them grow up. She wanted to support them on their difficult life path. Life is indeed not easy. People need help, support, understanding, love. Meanwhile, Clara was turning the locket in her hands. It had somehow strongly attracted her attention. Finally, she pried open the lid with her fingernail. A gasp of surprise was heard. Clara covered her mouth with her hand. "That's my mother," the woman finally said, pointing at Katie's photo. "She's younger here, but it's definitely her. I recognized her." It can't be. Eleanor Vance hadn't recovered from one shock, and here was another. It just doesn't happen like that. It does, it turns out. That's definitely my mother. Her eyes, her lips, her nose. I remember her face in the smallest details. What was your mother's name? Katie. I named my older daughter after her. Of course! How did I not realize right away? My student was also named Katie. She disappeared when she was a teenager. I didn't help her. I didn't understand in time. She ran away to a camp with a Roma man, and then she gave birth to me. Incredible. I couldn't help Katie, but I helped her daughter. And you in turn saved me. All of this still needed to be processed. But at that very moment, Eleanor Vance somehow became absolutely certain that the illness had receded and that she now had a life.